After going all out at their final rallies, the U.S. presidential candidates await the election results.
Heavy security all around the White House as U.S. voters prepare to choose their next president. Democratic candidate Kamala Harris expected here at the nation's capital on election night.
Protests lead to Taiwan's Justice Ministry axing a proposal to crack down on illegal abortions. Plus,
to preserve or to demolish? That's the question facing this downtown Taipei icon. I'll tell you why up ahead.
Hello and welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Eric Gao. Thanks for joining us this evening. We begin in the United States, where campaigning for the closely fought 2024 presidential election has wrapped up. Democratic candidate Kamala Harris and Republican candidate Donald Trump have spent the last hours of their campaigns trying to sway undecided voters in key battleground states. Harris made her final pitch to voters in Pennsylvania with several celebrity endorsements. The current vice president called for change while stressing the importance of voting and reproductive rights.
Our campaign has tapped into the ambitions and the aspirations and the dreams of the American people. We are optimistic and we are excited about what we can do together. And we know it is time for a new generation of leadership in America.
Trump also spoke to an arena of supporters in Pittsburgh. The former president told the crowd that if elected, he would impose tariffs on China and Mexico over illegal fentanyl imports. He also continued attacks on the Democrats' handling of the economy and immigration.
Kamala Harris has delivered soaring prices and economic anguish at home, war and chaos abroad, and nation-destroying invasion on our southern border like nobody's ever seen before. She's actually a disaster. My message to Americans tonight is simple. We do not have to live this way. We don't. We don't. And we won't. We won't.
With polls still neck and neck, the race for the White House is too close to call. More than 80 million Americans have already cast their ballots in early voting, and the earliest in-person polls have just opened. We have reporters on the ground across the U.S. Louise Watt is following the Trump campaign in Florida, but we begin in Washington, D.C., where security is being ramped up amid fears of violence. Joyce Zeng begins our coverage.
The White House, a symbol of American democracy, is under tight security with just hours to go until voters choose their next president. Barricades are up all around the perimeter to ward off any possible violence around these tightly contested elections. Earlier, elsewhere in the city, businesses also boarding up their windows. Democratic candidate Kamala Harris will be spending election night here in the nation's capital. In the final hours of her campaign, she was in the crucial battleground state of Pennsylvania in a last push to win over undecided voters. It's been a whirlwind run for Harris, launching it in record time after U.S. President Joe Biden unexpectedly dropped out of the race in July. Now, she's been clear on her pledges. She says she will cut down on the cost of living and protect fundamental rights like reproductive freedoms and be the steady hand at the wheel steering the U.S. through this critical time. Earlier, I spoke to Zach Cooper, a national security expert who has worked at the Pentagon and the White House. He says the U.S. is facing unprecedented challenges.
When Biden took office, there was no war in Ukraine. There was no war going on in Gaza. And, although Taiwan tensions were high, they're probably higher now than they were then. This is just a much more severe threat environment than it was 4 years ago.
And does Harris have enough foreign policy experience to handle the presidency?
We just don't know exactly, what she might do because she hasn't had this chance before. But I do think it's important to remember that she's had time both in the Senate and now as vice president to get pretty familiar with a lot of foreign policy issues.
Harris has warned that her Republican rival, Donald Trump, is, quote, unstable and a wannabe dictator, calling him a threat to democracy. Now, as one of the tightest races in U.S. history draws to a close, Harris is calling on voters to put country over party when choosing who to send to the White House. Luffy Lee, Andrew Ryan, and Joyce Zhen in Washington, D.C. for TaiwanPlus.
It's been a turbulent election campaign for Donald Trump. He's been the target of 2 assassination attempts, and there are accusations that a win for him would threaten America's democracy. Louise Watt reports now from the venue where he's going to be in just a few hours.
On election night, Trump supporters are expected to be lining this road because the man himself will be inside here, the Palm Beach Convention Center in Florida. Why here? Because it's just a couple of miles up the road from his Mar-a-Lago beachside resort. In the 2 days before Election Day, Trump has been busy elsewhere, ramping up his rallies.
Hello, beautiful, beautiful North Carolina.
He and his vice presidential nominee, J.D. Vance, have been holding more than a dozen rallies in crucial swing states. Trump's messaging is simple. He says he'll be stronger on the economy, border control, and global leadership. He says he won't start any wars. In the crucial swing state of Pennsylvania, his supporters say they trust him on these issues.
And I'm supporting him because I know that trickle-down economics works, because when he was in before, we had gotten 2 raises out of the clear blue sky and a bonus.
We have a lot of politicians that, he doesn't have a filter, and I like that. Whether you like the guy, you have to respect the fact that he says what he feels. And he said if he says he's going to do it, it gets done. May not be pretty, but it gets done, absolutely.
Trump's opponent, Kamala Harris, argues he's a danger to democracy, given that he's threatened to go after his political enemies. Donald Trump has already won twice here in Florida, but on election night, all eyes are going to be on those crucial swing states. The result could be so close, it may take days to know who's won the presidency. Justin Wu, Ed Moon, and Louise Watt in West Palm Beach, Florida, for TaiwanPlus.
Now, to understand how the outcome of this election might impact U.S. foreign policy in the Asia-Pacific region, Alec McDonald spoke to Professor Simona Grano from the University of Zurich.
As we look at the U.S. election tomorrow, regardless of who the United States elects, what are the most significant flashpoints in the Asia-Pacific region?
Right. So I think that regardless who wins the elections, I would say that there are currently 3 major potential flashpoints in the Asia-Pacific region that are here to stay. One is South Korea's relations with North Korea. The second one is cross-strait relations between mainland China and Taiwan. And the third one is the Sino-Philippines conflict or disputes over reefs and islands in the South China Sea. And all 3 of them have recently escalated to higher levels of tensions.
So as we look forward to 4 years, there's a lot of foreign policy that can drastically change. What might the Asia-Pacific region look like in 4 years' time?
So if Trump wins, I think that we may be looking at a profoundly different world in 4 years' time, one in which, for example, many security pacts and alliances created by the Biden administration in the Indo-Pacific may have collapsed, and in which, for instance, the US may have turned to a more inward-looking position, retreating, for example, from international organizations and also partially from support to allies in Europe and Asia. If Kamala Harris wins, provided that she will continue to govern along the same lines of Biden, I think we will continue to see the creation of new security pacts or existing ones, trade pacts, alliances with like-minded countries, although her stance on China is a little bit uncertain at the moment, as she has recently stated that Iran and not China are the US main adversary.
Looking forward to Taiwan specifically, what are some ways that the United States election results may affect Taiwan?
Taiwan would probably need to be better prepared in case Trump would win the elections. I think that the unpredictability of a Trump presidency compared to the possible continuity of a Joe Biden administration if Kamala Harris wins could mean that Trump would put Taiwan under pressure. One consequence could be, for example, on the island semiconductor industry. We know that TSMC, the biggest semiconductor Taiwanese company, is expanding its footprint in the US. And if Trump wins, he could actually influence heavily this industry, or could try to. Another major impact could be on Taiwan, could be that Taiwan would be forced to pay more for American support of Taiwan's defense. However, I have to say that Congress in the United States has long been a supporter of Taiwan, and this is unlikely to change in the future. So I believe that there will be some degree of continuity regardless of who wins the elections, for example, in continuing to sell arms to Taiwan and also projecting a tough stance against any efforts by Beijing to try to change the status quo.
That was University of Zurich professor Simona Grano discussing the implications for U.S. foreign policy from the presidential election. Taiwan's Justice Ministry has rescinded a proposal to increase fines for women who have illegal abortions after lawmakers and women's rights groups protested those changes. Cadence Quaranta reports.
Legislators and women's rights organizations are at Taipei's legislature to protest against a proposed increase in fines for illegal abortions. The Justice Ministry has proposed a change to the criminal code that would increase fines for illegal abortions from around $100 to $2,500. Groups here say there have only been 10 cases related to this criminal law in the last 10 years, so they're questioning why fines should be increased now.
所以我们今天非常意外、讶异的听到法务部要提出修法来加重处罚。所以法务部，我真的要问，到底你们是从什么年代来的部会？这是这一种过时跟落后的思维，我们绝对没有办法允许。
Abortions in Taiwan are legal for pregnancies before 24 weeks, but women who are married have to get permission from a partner. These are restrictions people here say are harmful to women.
这个法律可能就将来会更方便这个先生去利用堕胎罪来控制这个妻子。例如说，想离婚的妻子，她如果不想生下小孩，那先生就会要挟说：好，我们必须在以不离婚的原则底下，我才同意你去堕胎。
Groups are also arguing that abortion in Taiwan should be governed by the Genetic Health Act alone and not by a criminal law. Scott Huang and Cadence Quaranta for TaiwanPlus.
A spokesperson for a fringe pro-China party has been prosecuted for allegedly accepting funds from Beijing. Zang Tong allegedly received over $2 million from China to shape public opinion here in Taiwan. His radio program and social media content allegedly tried to influence Taiwan's presidential election earlier this year. He's now being charged under Taiwan's anti-infiltration law. Prosecutors argue that his program threatens the country's national security.
在其所主持之台湾向前走广播电台节目以及网络平台介入我国选举、罢免及公投等政治议题，影响我国民主法治之正常发展，严重威胁国家安全。
Zhang Shou was said to promote China's military while advocating for Taiwan's surrender in what's being termed cognitive warfare. A pedestrian bridge slated for demolition has sparked protests among Taipei residents. Officials have safety concerns about the 42-year-old bridge, but protesters say the bridge is not only safe, it has cultural and historic value too. John Van Trieste reports.
Amid a gray drizzle, residents of this Taipei neighborhood have taken up spots on a piece of local history they're afraid they'll soon lose. The Heping-Xinsheng pedestrian bridge in downtown doesn't appear in most guides to the city. But across Taiwan, even those who don't know its name recognize it. It's appeared in several classic Taiwanese films and been a centerpiece in music videos by big-name bands such as Mayday. A protest movement backed by a 1,500 signature petition stopped a plan to demolish the bridge on Monday. But some locals worried about how long they can delay the project have been up here since early Tuesday to make sure it's protected. Popular culture is only one layer to the structure's significance, as the array of protest banners, graffiti, and other signs of love from local residents shows. One activist who's camped out here says the bridge is a survivor, one of the few pedestrian bridges that wants to define Taipei's urban landscape. And he says it has historic importance too.
曾经是台北第一任民选市长里面的基站热区，所以它见证了民主那个时候直选的那个过程。然后那个时候我记得整个桥上 站了快要1000个人都有。因为那个时候，包括后来当选那个总统的陈水扁，他选市长的时候，他以前有个扁帽工厂在那里，然后另外一个候选人赵少康在这里。
The city government says the plan to demolish the bridge is guided by safety concerns. It says the bridge is 42 years old and ready for retirement, and that similar intersections with bridges had far fewer accidents after they were torn down.
在拆除上我想是有助于行车安全，而我们的配套还是有的，包括前穿线的退缩，包括庇护岛，包括栏杆，还有整个号志实质的配置。
But Ms. Le, who's lived here since before the bridge was built, says demolishing it won't make the intersection safer. She thinks the government should just repair the bridge to extend its life.
因为我们知道这边有一些角落，其实就是同一个家庭，他有这个母女有3人，妈妈带着姐姐过马路，就是被一个砂石车这样子，好像就是撞了，然后就走了。那妹妹呢，因为行动慢，她就走天桥。 然后他就活下来了，所以这个故事我不希望能够再重演。
At least one other bridge slated for destruction is already being taken down. But thanks to grassroots activism, Mayor Jiang Wan-an has hit the pause button for talks with locals who feel they weren't consulted. From the outpouring of love on display here, it's clear this bridge has cemented its place in the urban fabric and in people's hearts and memories. But given the government says its safety concerns are unresolved, it's hard to say whether all this love will be enough to save this bridge from demolition. Klein Wang and John Van Trieste in Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
Yeah, coming up after the break. Rescuers mobilize after a deadly volcanic eruption in eastern Indonesia.
A pivotal election that will impact Taiwan and the world. Will it be President Harris or President Trump?
People, we are moving forward.
Make America great again.
I'm in the United States in the final stretch.
TaiwanPlus has you covered with exclusive reports from California to Texas and Washington to Florida. We'll be there on election night as America decides. Only on TaiwanPlus.
Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. At least 10 people have been killed and thousands evacuated following a volcanic eruption in eastern Indonesia. Wesley Lewis reports.
Search and rescue operations underway after a deadly volcanic eruption on eastern Indonesia's Flores Island. Mount Lewotobi Laki-Laki erupted late Sunday night, spewing columns of lava, thick plumes of ash, and blazing rocks, burning down nearby houses and killing at least 10 people. Some villagers say they only survived by taking shelter.
Dalam rumah ya kita hanya berdoa saja, kita ini cari tempat yang bisa aman sehingga batu jatuh kan, kalau batu yang kecil kan mungkin masih bisa ketahan, tapi kalau yang kayak begini ini kan dia batu terus dia lontarkan dengan bola api. Kayak bola api itu kan ada yang sebesar ini kan, makanya rumah hancur terbakar begini.
Other survivors recount fleeing their homes despite sustaining injuries from volcanic debris.
Dicari auto, tetap saya ini sudah darah, macam orang pukul itu, pergi bawa cari auto. Jadi saya muat dengan istri, anak saya, antar sampai kantor desa, istri dan anak ikut mobil lain lagi pergi lari ke Volcanic, jadi saya punya rumah juga habis dimakan, habis.
Authorities have warned of potential further destruction up to 7 kilometers from the crater, forcing local officials to evacuate thousands of residents.
Berdasarkan rekomendasi dari pos pengamat gunung api bahwa 3 desa yang paling terdampak, Duli Pali, Kelatan Gausa, Mahokeng Jaya, tidak boleh ada warga yang beraktivitas di kampung dan harus segera dievakuasi, dan mereka sudah dievakuasi di 3 titik pengungsian.
A joint force of police, military personnel, and rescue workers have been dispatched to the region. Digging through collapsed houses, they search for more victims. But local officials say the central government isn't doing enough, and that more help is needed to alleviate human suffering in the area.
Hajar di saya, turun di saya. Jadi panik ya, lari saja. Kita tidak tahu badan nanti baru ketemu di buru saja.
Local authorities are now warning of potential flash flooding and cold lava flows in the coming days, adding urgency to current evacuation and rescue operations. Hank Xu and Wesley Lewis for TaiwanPlus.
More troops have been deployed to devastated regions in eastern Spain after the country was hit by its worst flash floods in decades. The extra 2,500 soldiers will join the 5,000 already in Valencia to help locate the bodies of dozens of people who are still missing. They will also distribute aid, clear debris, and guard against looters. Public anger is mounting over the disaster that killed at least 217 people, with criticisms of late warnings from authorities and a delayed emergency response. Meanwhile, a red alert for more torrential rain has been issued for the Catalonia region in northeast Spain. North Korea has fired a volley of short-range ballistic missiles into waters off the east coast of the Korean peninsula. These launches come just days after Pyongyang test-fired a new solid-fuel ballistic missile. South Korean security officials say they are monitoring the situation and they are sharing intelligence with Japan and the U.S. Seoul's defense ministry earlier warned that the North would ramp up military activity to draw attention ahead of the U.S. presidential election. Top diplomats from South Korea and the European Union are calling for greater security ties after their first strategic meeting. It comes as North Korea sends troops to Russia for deployment in its war in Ukraine. The EU's foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, stressed the urgent need to bolster joint security and defense capabilities in the face of growing cooperation between Moscow and Pyongyang.
It's not a theoretical approach. It is because the war is at the borders of Europe, and it is because in this war, North Korean troops are going to participate. So this increases the need for us to work together.
The two sides also underscored the importance of their shared values and for democracies to work together. For much of the last century and a half, donkeys were the go-to choice for low-income vendors carrying their wares through the streets of Karachi, Pakistan's largest city. But now, inflation and urban sprawl have some of them wondering if these beasts of burden are here for the long haul. Bryn Thomas reports.
Like many people in Karachi's donkey cart business, Mohammed wonders if his asses are still assets. A few years back, it cost him less than $1 a day to feed his animals. Today, it costs him around $3.
पहले भी यही मजदूरी कर रहे थे पहले भी तकरीबन गधा गाड़ी चला रहे थे बाकी पहले कुछ और टाइम था वहाँ सस्ता ही थी और हर चीज़ सस्ती मिलती थी.
For much of the last 150 years, donkeys were the cheapest way to haul things through Karachi's narrow streets. Coming to and from local markets, their carts were so common that they required license plates. That's all changed. A combination of inflation and urban sprawl has made donkeys less economical. At nearly 20 million people, Pakistan's largest city is 50 times more populous than it was 80 years ago. That boom has come with modern roads, making donkeys impractical. Their sellers say people still eye the animals, but after a bit of heeing and hawing, usually leave empty-handed.
हम लोग आते हैं इधर बैठ के चलाते हैं खर्चे भी हो जाते हैं बिकते नहीं दोबारा कर ले जाते हैं फिर एक हफ्ता इंतजार करते हैं उसके लिए फिर जब ये इतवार आता है उस इतवार फिर ले आते हैं बिक गया तो बिक गया नहीं बिक गया तो समझ ये खर्चा मेरा दोबारा चलेगा ये होता है इसमें बिक गया तो हमको 2-4 हज़ार मिल जाते हैं नहीं बिका तो समझ एक हफ्ते का खर्चा और बढ़ेगा गधे का.
There's one donkey for every 40 people in Pakistan. And while inflation is cutting into profits, they remain the cheapest option for shipping short distances. So while some may be in favor of phasing them out, others remain stubborn.
कभी क़यामत तक ख़त्म नहीं हो रहा है 76 साल मैंने आपकी उम्र अपनी बताई तो अभी भी मैं मर जाऊंगा मेरा बजदाई कोई 76 साल में आ जाएगा नहीं होगी ख़त्म.
So while it's clear that the donkey's heyday may be over, it will be a long time yet before they're put out to pasture. Fu Hua Hong and Bryn Thomas for TaiwanPlus.
Environmentalists say the volume of plastic waste in Taiwan has grown far beyond expectations. As other countries work out a global plastic treaty, they want Taiwan to get reducing and reusing. John Van Trieste has this story.
Taiwan's battle against plastic waste doesn't look like it's going well. While the cabinet drew up a strategy to tackle the issue way back in 2003, environmentalists say the volume of waste has exploded, even just in the past decade.
就发现说我们的废弃物并没有减少。那台湾的废弃物产量啊，从2014年的2800多万吨上升到2023年的3300多万吨。那这远远超过了当初政府所定的目标。
The groups represented here have a few ideas about why this has happened.
因为贸易大战，所以有很多台商回流嘛，直接导致我们的制造业增加，然后事业废弃物增加。后来的新冠疫情带来短暂效应。
Much of this plastic is burnt rather than reused or recycled, and the government is planning to increase the capacity of incinerators, which currently can't keep up with the amount of waste being produced. Today, these groups are gathered to release a report they drew up with international help on this problem.
很多都是拿去当燃料烧掉。那在欧盟，就是我们废弃物处理方式的优先顺序，应该是源头减量优先，再使用、再利用。但是它的再利用包括能源回收。
In just a few weeks, diplomats from around the world will gather in South Korea for a last round of talks on a global plastic treaty. Though Taiwan is often sidelined in global affairs, these environmentalists say it's time the country steps up its fight to cut down waste from the source. Alex Chen and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
Thanks for joining us here on TaiwanPlus News. Tune in again tomorrow afternoon for our live coverage of the U.S. election results. Now, before we go, we take you to Prague to check out an old-school bicycle race with old-school outfits. I'm Eric Gao. Take care, and we'll see you next time.